Hey YouTube walkers, it's me, not Andrew. So, I've been messing around quite a bit in Arena, and I think I found a deck that might be completely format warping. What if I told you I was able to brew up a consistent turn 3 combo for Standard? Would you call me crazy? But before I can show you the list, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, all those things. Please, I'm begging you! And also, I actually do have a Twitter now, so link is in the description. All right, let's get right to the core of the deck, specifically the cards that enable the turn 3 combo that every single card in our deck is working towards. So the main two cards we want to see for our nut draw are Fling and Righteousness. We're playing 4 copies of both. Righteousness lets one of our guys gain +7/+7 for just 1 mana with little to no restriction. And then Fling lets us sacrifice a creature and deal its power to our opponent's face for just 2 more mana. Now these cards both need us to have creatures in play for them to work properly. So for our creature base, we have 4 Footlight Fiend, 4 Goblin Banneret, and 2 Fervent Champions. Okay, so the combo goes like this. Turn 1, play a land, play one of our 10 1-drop creatures. Turn 2, play another land. Nothing else really matters since we don't really do much turn 2. Turn 3, play another land, pass to opponent. Opponent attacks, we block, cast Righteousness on our creature, making him an 8/8. At worst, cast Fling with our remaining 2 mana straight at our opponent's face. That's 8 damage, turn 3, just 3 turns, 3 cards for 8 damage, turn 3 standard combo. I'm calling the deck Righteous Fling. Okay, so now let's go through my creature selection. Footlight Fiend is probably the best of our creatures because he tacks on 1 additional point of damage we can direct our opponent's face when we sacrifice him for a Fling. Goblin Banneret is less than ideal, but he could potentially lead to even more damage than Fiend if we somehow don't draw our pieces until later turns. And finally, we've got 2 Fervent Champions. These guys are basically just vanilla 1/1s, but they have some additional situational, yet impactful synergies with our deck, which I'll get to here in a minute. Now the thing with standard combos, and really combos in general, is we aren't always going to get our nut draw. So for that reason, it's always good to model the rest of your deck to be working towards that combo. One way to do this, which we're going to be taking liberal advantage of in this deck, is through a theory many deck builders use called redundancy. Redundancy means that instead of just playing 4 copies of our main combo pieces, like Fling, we're playing as many additional copies as we can through other similar cards. So since we're playing at least 8 copies of each important piece to our combo, we're much more likely to be able to assemble our pieces. Okay, so as for Fling, the only real extra copies we have in Standard are Heartfires. Admittedly, Heartfire is a bit of a downgrade from Fling, but they can get you there in a pinch. Now, just a tip, if you're going off with a Heartfire in your opening hand, you probably want to attack with your creature before you Heartfire them, which is something that probably wouldn't be on your radar if you're going off with Fling and Righteousness. Okay, so as extra copies of the other half of the deck's namesake, Righteousness, we have 4 Giant Growth, 4 Growth Cycle, 3 Bounty of Might, and 3 Colossus Hammer. Giant Growth and Growth Cycle are pretty much just straight powered down versions of Righteousness, but either will do in a pinch. Now, Bounty of Might and Colossus Hammer can actually be situationally better than Righteousness, but since they are less consistently impactful, I'm only playing 3 copies of each of those. Bounty of might seem like a confusing inclusion. The reason it might be confusing is that we'll usually only have 1 creature on the board, but the neat thing about this card is you can actually target the same creature with each different instance of +3/+3. Which means we pump a guy 9 damage for just 1 card. Now that might sound even better than Righteousness because 9 is a bigger number than 7, but remember, this card costs quite a bit more mana. Now, it's still undercosted at just 6 mana for 9 damage, but it's still not as good of a power to mana ratio as Righteousness. Okay, and finally for the extra righteousness copies, we have our sole artifact equipment, which is Colossus Hammer. Colossus Hammer is great because it has the biggest number written in its text box that I could find in Standard. +10/+10 is an absolutely insane boost for just 1 mana. That's 10 damage for 1 mana. Now, some of you might be off-put by the second biggest number in Colossus Hammer's text box, which is that equipment cost. While 8 mana is quite a bit, that's still 8 mana for 10 damage. And another thing to remember is that activated abilities don't put you down a card. So cards like this with activated abilities are basically a form of card advantage. Now, the hammer is the main reason we're playing a couple copies of our good friend Javier Dominguez. If you sort through his giant wall of text, you'll find that one of his abilities allows you to reduce the cost of equipment activation, which means our Colossus Hammer is just 5 mana for 10 damage. That is a 2-to-1 mana to damage ratio. But we're still only playing 2 copies of him because I found that the game's pretty much always over by the time I'd be wanting to do any of this stuff. Now, the biggest weakness of this deck is that we really need our opponent to be attacking us for our righteousness to work. While it might seem insignificant at first glance, the fact that righteousness needs to be targeted on a blocking creature can sometimes cause us a little bit of an issue. And even on top of that, there are quite a few decks in Standard right now that don't even play creatures, such as Mono White Bag of Holding. So we've got a little package here to help us deal with these types of matchups, ones where our opponents are too big of losers to attack us or play creature cards at all. The best solution to this problem is to force our opponents to play Magic with dignity by giving them some creatures to attack us with. So first of all, we have 4 copies of the best way in Standard to give our opponents a non-toxic win condition, creatures, Oko, Thiever Crowns. Now we can either turn Bag of Holding into a 3/3 elk right away, or we can just take him up and next turn swap one of our creatures for the elk. Now we don't really want to be giving our creatureless opponents food tokens, so I've got some cards here I'd like to call the Trojan Horses of the deck. Those are 4 Rubblebelt Recluse and 2 Oathsworn Knight. If we swap these cards to our opponent, it forces them to attack us each turn, which is exactly what we want. I'm only playing 2 Oathsworn Knight because I found it sometimes better for us to just use them to attack our opponent, but that's not the specific strategy we're trying to use to win here. As for redundant copies of Oko, we have 3 Wishclaw Talisman, 1 Roll Reversal, and 1 Clackbridge Troll. Now, Wishclaw Talisman is a cheap, effective, redundant piece for Oko because we can use our Oko to turn it into an elk after we've already wished up a different Oko and given them the talisman. So we're just the singleton copy of Roll Reversal. The reason it's just a singleton is because it's not very useful if we haven't already given our opponent a creature, because we'll need a target, but it's great against opponents who play a lot of creatures with Defender. And we just have the singleton Clackbridge Troll as well. Now, while obviously Clackbridge Troll is just a generally great card, and he does give our opponent a bunch of goats to attack us with, it allows our opponents to sacrifice the Rubblebelt Recluses we've given them, which just undoes a lot of our hard work. Now, after playtesting with this deck quite a bit, I found that at least a little bit of interaction is necessary for our strategy to really take off. Now, because we're an ultra-fast combo deck, we want to really tailor our removal for exactly what we need it for, so that's why we're playing 4 copies of Demotion. Now, this card isn't removal in the traditional sense, but what our deck is most concerned about is creatures not attacking us as opposed to attacking us. So we don't really need to remove attacking creatures, we need to remove defending creatures. And if they can't block, they have to attack. Or at least we hope they do. This card might as well read destroy target blocking creature, and it just costs 1 white mana. Now for the final portion of the deck, we have our card advantage engines. In a deck like this, we don't really need to play a whole lot of cycle, search, or traditional draw spells because we already have our Colossus Hammer, which goes a long way towards giving us card advantage. But for value, I have 4 Hydroid Krasis. Okay, and now we're to the most boring, useless part of every deck tech, the mana base. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 who cares, blah, blah, blah. Well, folks, that's my deck tech. I hope you sleeve it up, spend your wild cards on it on Arena, And I'll be back next time for a playtest video, and we'll construct our sideboard. And just remember, everybody, keep on playing magic. No, pretty painless.